So, um, I want you to picture a scoreboard.
Okay, a scoreboard.
Yeah, but not for a game, for life. Like if we were sitting here with you in the year 1400 and we were trying to check who was, winning at life.
We definitely wouldn't be looking at bank accounts.
Right. We wouldn't be checking stock portfolios or anything like that. We'd be looking at dirt.
Literally just dirt.
Literally. The scoreboard back then was basically how much land do you hold and how many people are stuck working on it.
It was a very physical, very tangible world. Wealth was what you could touch, what you could eat, and who you could command. It was entirely static.
But then, and this is exactly why we're diving into these sources today, someone flips the table.
Totally.
In the span of roughly 2 centuries, the script changes completely. We go from a world where wealth is just stuff to a world where wealth is paper.
Or numbers in a ledger, shares in a venture.
Exactly. It's like we effectively downloaded the operating system for the modern world.
That is a great way to frame it, actually. We usually call this period the Commercial Revolution. It runs roughly from 1450 to 1648.
Which honestly sounds a bit like a boring chapter in a textbook.
It does. But what it really was, if you look at the research, is the software update that installed Global Capitalism 1.0.
And looking at the stack of research we have for this deep dive, it's clear this wasn't just about some merchants getting rich. This shifted everything.
It rewired the human experience.
It did. It changed how wars were fought, what people ate, and the part that really stuck with me, it even changed when people fell in love and got married.
Yeah, we moved from a feudal, subsistence-based hierarchy to a really dynamic and often ruthless, money-driven machine.
So the mission today is to trace that update for you. We need to unpack how Europe transitioned from knights and castles to stocks and bonds.
And I think we have to start with the engine of this whole thing, the shift to a money economy.
Because before this period, money existed, sure, but it wasn't the point of the system.
Exactly. The old system was all about obligation and service. I give you land, you give me military service. But as trade expanded, especially with the Americas and Asia, that old system just couldn't handle the bandwidth.
You need new centers of power.
Right. We see the power shift from the landed aristocracy, the guys in the castles, to the urban elites in financial hubs like Amsterdam, Genoa, and London.
And based on the sources, Amsterdam really seems to be the Silicon Valley of the 17th century here.
Oh, without a doubt. If you want to understand the modern global economy, you really have to look at the Bank of Amsterdam, which was founded in 1609.
Now, 1609. I know banks existed before then, but the notes describe this as a fundamental shift in how money actually worked. It wasn't just a vault where you put your gold, right?
No, it was a clearinghouse. See, before the Bank of Amsterdam, if you were a merchant, you were dealing with an absolute nightmare of currency.
Right, just a chaotic mix of coins.
Exactly. You had coins from France, Spain, tiny German principalities. Some were clipped, some were fake, some were pure gold, some were junk.
So trying to do a large deal was physically difficult and really risky. You'd need a scale and a chemist just to buy a shipment of wool.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
The Bank of Amsterdam solved this by creating bank money.
Which was revolutionary.
It was. You deposit your chaotic pile of coins, they weigh and assay it, and they give you credit in a standardized unit of account.
Suddenly, you could settle massive debts with a stroke of a pen instead of dragging a wagon full of metal across Europe.
It effectively virtualized the money. It reduced the friction of trade to almost zero.
And that lack of friction allowed for scale. But to manage that massive scale, the sources highlight that they needed better software.
Which brings us to double-entry bookkeeping.
Yes, the unsung hero of capitalism.
I have to stop you there, though. I know historically this is considered a breakthrough, but double-entry bookkeeping sounds like the most boring topic on earth.
It does sound incredibly dry, I'll grant you that.
You have to convince me this actually matters to the listener.
Okay, think of it this way. Before double entry, a merchant basically just kept a diary.
Oh.
Bought wool, sold wool. It was a narrative.
A journal of what happened?
Right. But double entry bookkeeping, which really took off in Italy and then spread north, is an algorithm. Every transaction is entered twice. Once as a debit, once as a credit. So the books always have to balance.
Exactly. It means you have an immediate mathematical picture of your business's health. It creates absolute accountability. You can't hide losses easily anymore.
Because the numbers have to match up on both sides.
Yes. And it allowed these merchant houses to grow into multinational corporations because you could actually track what was happening in your branch in London while you were sitting in Florence.
It turned business into a science. It's the difference between guessing your bank balance and having a real-time dashboard.
And that dashboard was strictly necessary because the bets were getting bigger. which leads us perfectly into the joint stock company.
This is the game changer.
Yeah.
This is what really fascinated me in the reading. We all know about the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, and the British East India Company.
The famous monopolies?
But the mechanism underneath them is wild. Before this, if we wanted to send a ship to the Spice Islands, we'd pull our money, send the ship, it comes back. Hopefully we sell the pepper, split the cash, and dissolve the partnership.
Right, it was project-based financing. One voyage, one deal.
But the VOC changed that. They introduced the concept of permanent capital.
That is the key distinction. In 1602, the VOC said, "We aren't giving you your money back after the first voyage. Or the second. Your money stays in the company, potentially forever."
Which honestly sounds like a terrible deal. Give us your gold and you can't have it back.
It sounds terrible unless you create a way for people to exit without hurting the company, and that's exactly why they invented the stock market.
Right.
If you wanted your money back, you didn't ask the VOC. You sold your slip of paper to another investor in the Amsterdam coffee houses.
That is the light bulb moment right there.
Yeah.
By locking the capital in, the company becomes immortal. It can build fortresses, it can maintain standing armies, it can plan 50 years into the future.
While the individual investor can still cash out on a Tuesday if they need liquidity.
It separated the life of the business from the life of the investor.
Precisely. And it allowed these companies to become literal states within states. The VOC wasn't just a shipping line, it was a colonial power with the ability to wage war, mint coin, and execute treaties, all powered by this new financial abstraction.
So we've got the banks, the books, and the stocks. The plumbing is built. But a plumbing system is useless without water. And in the 16th century, Europe gets hit with a tidal wave of liquidity.
We need to talk about silver.
Yes, the silver flood. This is where the story shifts from European innovation to global extraction. We have to look at Potosi in modern-day Bolivia.
The mountain that eats men.
A literal mountain of silver. The Spanish Empire extracted thousands of tons of silver using forced indigenous labor. And this silver didn't just stay in Spain.
No, it flooded the European markets entirely.
And this brings us to the price revolution. The sources describe this incredibly counterintuitive situation where Spain, the country finding all this money, actually goes bankrupt multiple times.
It's a classic case of confusing money with wealth. Spain had all the silver, but they weren't producing the goods. So they spent this silver buying cloth from England, guns from Germany, grain from the Baltic.
The silver spread out, effectively devaluing the currency across the entire continent.
It's inflation 101, but on a continental scale. If you double the amount of silver coins in circulation, but you don't double the amount of wheat, the price of wheat doubles.
And the research points out this inflation lasted for over a century. Prices kept climbing. Now, for a merchant, this is actually great.
Oh, it's fantastic. You buy inventory, wait a month, and it's worth more. Your debts are easier to pay off because money itself is cheaper.
But there's a massive disconnect here. While prices soared, wages did not keep pace. So for the peasants and the urban poor, they faced rising living costs without higher income.
They were the immediate losers of this system.
And for the people we started this deep dive with, the old landed aristocracy, this was also a disaster.
It was a total crisis. Think about it. If you're a lord, your income usually comes from long-term fixed leases. Your peasants pay you, say, 10 shillings a year to farm a plot. That lease might be locked in for 99 years.
So the lord is getting 10 shillings, but 10 shillings now buys a loaf of bread instead of a whole cow.
Exactly. Their real income cratered. Meanwhile, the new money merchants in the cities were flashing their wealth, buying fancy clothes, and gaining serious political influence. The old nobility was being squeezed out.
And this is the crucial link I want to make sure we nail for the listener. Because they were losing money, the landlords had to change the rules of the game. They couldn't just sit back and collect rent anymore.
They had to commercialize the land itself, farming for profit, not survival.
This is the bridge to the enclosure movement.
Right. The landlords realized that traditional feudal farming with small strips of land and shared common areas was deeply inefficient, and more importantly, it was unprofitable.
So they needed to implement systems of efficiency. The sources briefly mention a transition from the old two-field system used in the Mediterranean to a three-field system in Northern Europe to increase crop yields.
Which helped productivity, sure, but they really needed a cash crop. And in England, that cash crop was wool.
The textile industry was absolutely booming. So landlords looked at their estates and said, why do I have 50 peasant families growing turnips here when I could fence it all off, put 300 sheep on it and sell the wool for a massive profit.
And fencing it off isn't a metaphor. They literally put up hedges and stone walls. They enclosed the commons.
It was a seizure of public assets. For centuries, the poorest villagers relied on the commons. Open land where they could graze a cow, collect firewood, catch a rabbit. It was their ultimate safety net.
And enclosure ripped that away.
The sources mention that this wasn't just a polite request to leave either. This was backed by parliamentary acts. It was legal eviction on a massive scale.
Sir Thomas more famously wrote that sheep are eating men. It completely destroyed the peasant way of life. If you lost your access to the land, you had no way to survive except to sell your labor.
And this is where the environmental factor kicks in. Because we aren't just talking about economic policy here. The sources highlight that all of this is happening right in the middle of the Little Ice Age.
This is a variable that often gets overlooked, but it's huge. Right around this time, the global climate cooled significantly. Rivers froze. Harvests failed repeatedly. The Thames in London would freeze over solid.
So you have a situation where food is already becoming scarce because of the weather, and at the exact same time, the landlords are kicking people off the land to raise sheep instead of growing grain.
It turned a difficult economic transition into a severe humanitarian disaster. The margin for error was completely gone. If you were a peasant kicked off your land in 1600, you were facing potential starvation.
It forced a massive migration. They couldn't stay in the countryside, so they flooded into the cities.
Yes.
Places like London, Amsterdam, Paris, they exploded in size.
London went from a minor capital to a sprawling metropolis in a very short time. But the infrastructure just wasn't there. No sewers, no zoning wood houses packed tightly together.
It was a disease trap. Plague, outbreaks, tuberculosis, overcrowding. The strain on municipal governments and the old guild systems was enormous due to all the rising poverty and crime.
But this is the dark irony of the whole system. These cities actually needed those desperate people.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? The commercial revolution needed a labor force. It needed sailors for the VOC ships' dock workers to unload the cargo weavers to process all that wool.
The enclosure movement provided that labor force by stripping them of any other option.
It created the proletariat, people who have nothing to sell but their time.
Exactly. And this reshaped the social hierarchy entirely. We talked about the new elites earlier. Money was buying status in ways it never had before.
Like in France, you had the nobles of the robe, rich lawyers and merchants who just purchased noble titles using commercial wealth. They became distinct from the old nobles of the sword.
And in Italy, you had the merchant princes. Families who combined raw commercial wealth with political influence to basically rule city-states.
It feels very familiar to today, but there's a split here that the sources detail, which I found really gripping. It's called the Great Divergence.
Yes, regarding serfdom.
Right. While Western Europe is moving toward this wage labor model, where people are technically free to starve or work, Eastern Europe went the completely opposite direction.
It's fascinating and deeply tragic. As Western Europe urbanized and enclosed their farms, they still needed to buy grain from somewhere. Eastern Europe, places like Poland, Prussia, Russia, became the breadbasket for the West.
But instead of modernizing and freeing their labor force, the Eastern nobles doubled down on the old ways.
They saw the massive demand for grain and decided the best way to maximize profit was to lock the peasants down even harder. They reinforced serfdom.
They passed laws forbidding peasants from leaving the land and actively suppressed revolts to keep the grain flowing.
So the freedom and commercial explosion in the West was partly fed by the re-enslavement of the East.
That is a very sobering connection to make. The global economy has always had these hidden costs. It connects the whole continent in a system of extraction and production, but with wildly different rules depending purely on geography.
It really does.
Let's bring this down to the street level, though. We've got the banks, the sheep, the serfs. But how did this massive shift alter the actual day-to-day life of a normal person? The research highlights something called the European marriage pattern. And honestly, this blew my mind.
It's one of the most unique demographic shifts in history. In most of the world and in Europe previously, universal early marriage was just the norm. You hit puberty, you get married, you join the extended clan.
But in this new commercial Europe, that stopped.
Because the underlying economics changed. Since you couldn't just rely on the family farm anymore, a young couple had to be financially independent to set up a household. You needed to finish an apprenticeship, save up wages, maybe wait for a cottage to become available.
So you literally have to wait to start your life.
And wait, they did. The average marriage age for women shot up to the mid to late 20s. A huge chunk of the population never married at all.
That sounds incredibly modern. We always hear about millennials ruining the marriage rate or people waiting until their 30s to settle down because they can't afford a house. But the data shows this survival strategy started in the 1600s.
It's the exact same mechanism at play. When your ability to survive depends on market wages rather than land inheritance, you have to delay gratification. You have to make it before you can build a family.
And this led to the nuclear family, too.
Right.
The idea of just mom, dad, and the kids separated from the grandparents and cousins.
Yes, the multi-generational household began to fade in the West. It was replaced by smaller, more mobile units, which again served the labor market perfectly. It's much easier for a couple to move to London for wage work than for a clan of 30 people to uproot.
It's ruthless efficiency applied directly to the home. And going back to the Little Ice Age you mentioned, every mouth to feed was a liability. So fewer childbearing years meant smaller families, which was an economic defense against the cold and the inflation.
It was a necessary adaptation to a very harsh new reality.
So if we zoom out and look at this entire commercial revolution journey, it really is the big bang of our current reality.
Without a question. We moved from a static feudal world of land and blood to a highly fluid world dominated by capital contracts and urban centers.
We established the financial tools, the Bank of Amsterdam, the double entry books, the joint stock markets that essentially run the world today.
We established the new labor dynamic with people moving to cities to work for wages and the creation of those new elites.
And we even established the social timeline. Get a job, save money, then get married.
This period created a world of immense opportunity and immense inequality. It unlocked the power of global trade, but it did so by displacing millions and commodifying the very ground we walk on.
It is the source code of modern capitalism.
Sure.
And I think that's the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. We stress out so much about our life timelines. Am I behind? Should I have bought a house by now? Why is it so hard to save?
We constantly treat these as personal failings.
Exactly. We internalize it. But looking at this history, maybe these aren't modern personal problems at all. Maybe we are just living out the economic logic that was written for us 400 years ago. We're still just trying to survive the enclosure, save up our silver, and find a place in the commercial machine.
That is a perspective that certainly takes some of the pressure off, doesn't it?
A little bit, or makes it more terrifying.
Yeah.
I'll let you decide. Either way, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next one.